Lots of things going on in life at the moment. Again, to come back to what I said at the beginning, we seem to say this on every show, this sort of weird upside down. You know when you go to a theatre and you're kind of waiting for the show to start, and there's like suddenly there's a bit of a lull, and then you hear some fella in the orchestra blow his trumpet. You go, oh, he's warming up, and you think, brilliant, guys, it's starting in a minute. The overture will be round the corner, and you look around and you see some lights move, and then eventually the show starts. It all kicks into action, and a green witch jumps on the stage. Fantastic. We're waiting for the green witch. It's almost as if we're in a sort of perpetual cycle of waiting for something to happen. It's applying across all areas of our life, but none more so, of course, than the economy. When is it going to pick? Is it just because we talk about it a lot now? Whereas perhaps we never used to quite as much. Once upon a time, there was a budget every year, and you'd read about it you might see it on the news at 10, and then you'd read about it in your newspapers the next day. Today, we're in a constant state of debate and discussion. Is it that? I don't know. It just seems that the "we're all royally skint" argument isn't going away. And we now know that the IFS has warned Rachel Reeves that she must be bold in her budget, facing a 22 billion quid plus shortfall. And a very thin financial buffer to deal with it. Fiscal pressure from borrowing, weak growth limit options, with Labour's tax pledges making new revenue tough. Reeves may target the wealthy, though, with higher capital gains tax or council tax. And we understand they might even blame Brexit for this and past Conservative budgets. Well, why wouldn't they? They're the Labour Party. Let's firstly speak to Martin Beck, Chief Economist at WPI Strategy. Martin, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Sorry about the orchestra analogy, but that's kind of how it does feel a little bit. We're sort of, I'm waiting for action. It's like watching my kid at the school running race. Come on, they'll blow the whistle any minute now. But there is no whistle. When is it going to get good?
Look, I think there's a tendency to be a bit too gloomy about the UK economy. But we're not out of positives.
Yeah.
If you look at, for example, our household balance sheets, savings are high, debt levels are low. Inflation is high at the moment, but hopefully as we move into next year, it will start coming down. Interest rates have been falling, and they should fall further in 2026. But that said, there's no doubt that Rachel Reeves has a couple of big problems facing her for the budget. The government's borrowing a lot of money at the moment. It's on course this year to borrow about £130 billion, or 5% of GDP, and that's a very high deficit for an economy which isn't in a recession. Debt's very high. We've got the highest public debt since the 1960s. And on top of all that, the cost of government borrowing is also rising. So she's kind of got she's facing a kind of triple whammy there.
Well, the short answer, as many people say, we'll talk to Dr. Phil White on this point. He's a member of Patriotic Millionaires, and I'm sure you're aware of their kind of stance and what they would propose. But that is an area we understand the Treasury are considering, and that's a wealth tax of some kind.
That's right. I think the issue of a wealth tax, politically, it looks very attractive. There are a lot of people out there with lots of money. I think the risk is that the revenue from a wealth tax would be very uncertain. We know that rich people are relatively mobile. They can leave the country quite easily. It would probably take several years to actually work out the mechanics of a wealth tax, so you might not get the revenue immediately. And I think the evidence suggests the wealth tax would have damaging effects on investment and confidence in the country. So I'm not sure a wealth tax is a panacea that some suggest it might be.
Well, if you put, and I don't want to advocate this, but if you put, 3%, top rate 45%, if you said, OK, it's going to be 48% on earnings over, say, 200,000, I would imagine that would bring in a fair few quid in itself.
It would bring a couple of billion. I think the risk there is that people on that kind of income, they're already paying a historically high share of their income in tax. Yeah. So if you push it up further, could you potentially tip them over the edge where they're discouraged from working harder, or they might even move to a place like Dubai or Milan or somewhere.
And I was just going to say, Martin, there is also it's not unreasonable to introduce a kind of an ethical component to this. Just because you've got a few quid, the idea that you have to give almost half of your money to the government doesn't follow, right? There's an argument to say, well, no, that's not fair, just to keep going to... What would you do every time there's a little bit of a bump in the road? You go, well, we'll make it 49% this year. What about 50%? Round it off nicely.
Even if you got the ethical point there, but even if you exclude that, I think from an economic perspective, given how high tax rates are now, that you do risk pushing people over the edge to the point where raising rates doesn't actually generate any more revenue. Where we move to what it's called the Laffer curve, where
the Laffer curve,
go up and up, revenues can actually fall. And I guess the theory is that the tax burden in the UK is the highest now since the 1950s. Are we getting to a point now where higher tax rates aren't very effective at raising more revenue?
Is it an urban myth that income tax only began as a temporary measure?
It was introduced, I think, during the Napoleonic Wars as a temporary measure then. But I think during the 19th century, the government got rid of import duties, and they thought income tax was a kind of a permanent way of replacing the revenues there. But you can see the ratchet effect there. When income tax began, it was probably like 5p in the pound.
Yeah.
Now, 45p for a higher earner.
Indeed. I mean, there is an argument that some people advocate, and that is that, we just have to get real. And yes, it will mean, whatever those ethical arguments about should you give half of your money to the government, which is quite a powerful line, but nonetheless, some advance the argument, Martin, that look, we've got an ageing population, we've got social care issues, NHS issues, education issues, so growing population, ageing population, etc., people living longer, massive problems. We literally just have to come clean and say, it's got to be paid for. Stop messing around with taking Peter's money to pay Paul. Just come straight out with it. If you're worth a few quid, it's 50%. It might be 55%. We'll have to up the lower levels as well a little bit, so 40% becomes 42. That, some argue, is the inevitable direction of travel.
That's a plausible argument, but let's not forget there are alternatives to higher taxes. One is to bring about more restraint when it comes to the public spending. I mean, sure, we've got to spend more on health and pensions, for example, because of an ageing population.
Yeah.
But if you look at, say, public sector productivity, that's still lower now than it was in 2019. There must be surely ways of reforming the public sector where we could get more output out of that part of the economy. And of course, the other alternative is to try and generate more growth in the economy.
Yeah.
If we get more growth, we'll get more tax revenues, and we won't need to raise tax rates to support the public finances. So let's think about what can we do in terms of promoting growth. And there's some obvious things there. For example, energy prices.
Yeah.
We have the highest energy prices in the Western world. That's hurting industry. It's hurting people's disposable income. So let's try and do something on energy prices. Let's look at reforms to the public sector to boost productivity. There are ways we could get growth up, but it does require some political capital and some risk-taking to do that.
Yeah. I want to get back to a few years ago, and it was a few years ago, but this is in the 90s, Martin. My direct debit for gas was 20 quid a month, and my direct debit for electricity was 20 quid a month, and it seemed to stay that way forever. I think we need to get back to a bit of that, don't we?
I think that would be very helpful. I mean, energy feeds into every form of economic activity you can think of.
Yeah.
If we can get energy prices down, we'll become more productive, more prosperous, and more competitive with countries in the rest of the world.
Spot on. Martin, thank you very much for your time. Appreciated. Martin Beck, Chief Economist at WPI Strategy. Let's